Hi, this is Steve Bunicountry from SOA Consulting Services. Today we're going to talk about Angular 4 intercomponent communication. And this is a continuation of our previous tutorial, which architecturally showed how components can communicate. And we're going to continue that tutorial by discussing code examples. The first one is going to describe input and output events and how components can communicate using annotations and template directives. Then we're going to discuss a mediator example, which describes the mediator pattern and shows how one component can communicate with another component using a mediator. Next, we're going to talk about the ng content tag and how to use projection so a parent component can project content into its child. And then we'll follow that with a select ng content example, which will show how to use multiple ng content tags and the select attribute to project multiple markup fragments from a parent to its child. So let's look at the code examples. The first code example was created using Angular CLI in WebStorm, and we have an index.html and a main.ts driver file. The main.ts basically bootstraps app module, which is located in a particular app directory. The app module has two custom components, an app component and an order component. And so they must be declared in ng module. And the bootstrap is pointing to the root app component. So we have two custom components, and app component is our root component. So let's take a look at app component. App component has the app-root selector. It imports a custom and an input from Angular core. It needs the component for the annotation, and it needs the input for the input annotation. App component has a product attribute, which is a string, and it also has a product ordered attribute, which is also a string. However, product ordered is an attribute which can be updated by change detection. It turns out that app component does have a child component that emits an event, and that event on notify updates the product ordered attribute. There's also an onInput event which updates the product attribute. So let's take a look at the template to see what's going on here. In the template, I have a text field, and when the text field has changed, the onInput method is invoked. The onInput method usually will take an event, but TypeScript allows you to use this syntax to grab the target out of the event. And so we're taking the target value inside the function and assigning it to the product attribute. The template also renders, using the double curly bracket, the expression which is product ordered. So whenever product ordered does change, the template will render its value using the binding. When I say the binding, I mean the interpolation operator, or whatever Angle is calling this at this point in time. Now, the app component also has an order processor child component. And that is mapping the product attribute inside the app component to an attribute called item inside the child component. So that's what this syntax means, that the parent can pass a value to a child, and it maps the product attribute name and value from the parent to the item attribute name and its value in the child. It also passes a quantity too, which is a hard-coded value, to the child. Now we know product ordered is in the parent component because we just saw that. Well, the child is going to emit an event called product ordered up to its template. And when that event is received from the child template, it will invoke the onNotify of the parent component. So let's go take a look at that component. Notice, I just want to point out, when child throws or emits an event of product ordered, it cannot be caught by the parent. It must be caught by the child in the child template. That is, the event bubbling does not go up to the parent. Okay, so let's look at the child. Child imports the component input output event emitter. We use the component annotation. We use the input and output annotation. And we also emitted an event from the product ordered attribute. Okay, so the selector is order processor. It has an external template, and it has an external style sheet. Before I forget, let's just take a look at our projects, and let me go into communication and start it. Okay, there's an input quantity number which has the @input annotation. Well, we know that quantity is passed as a constant value 2. So that 2 will be passed into the child component, which is the order component. Now I also declare a product ordered output component. Its type is event emitter. It emits a string. And I instantiate it as an event emitter. So now this attribute of the child is an event emitter. That's why it can emit an event anytime we need it to. Now, let's take a look at the parent template again. The parent template is passing in the product, which gets mapped to items. So let's try not to make this too complex. The bottom line is the item comes into this input, which sets the item. And it sets the item, it logs it, and once it gets logged, sending order for byproduct, this item of this quantity, the product ordered emits an event, and it passes it back up to the parent. The product, this item, with the quantity, this quantity, has been ordered. Let's look at the template. Buying a quantity of a product. So notice, as simple as this might be, although I'm doing input and output at the same time in this example, it's starting to get a little bit more complex and certainly a little bit more challenging. But the power of it is interesting. So let's take a look at what this thing looks like. It looks like my npm start occurred. That used Angular CLI to invoke serve, and basically that's using the Webpack development server to serve our application and monitor any changes. So as long as we hit on the port number, we get to see our application in action. Okay, so let me show you a couple more things. First of all, our app component has a Dodger blue background color. Our order component has a light green background color. And the style here for the web app is, the body is turquoise. Okay. So let's type in a product. And I hear enter product like iPad. So let's do iPhone 7. Hit return. What happened is the product name went into the child component. The child and I also passed in a constant 2 of quantity. The child component said we're buying 2 of product iPhone. After we rendered that and logged it, I emitted an event back up to the parent that said the product iPhone 7 with quantity 2 has been ordered. So it's a very simple example of input and output using annotations and how these components can communicate. I also logged to the console sending order to buy product iPhone 7 of quantity 2. So let's change this a little bit. iPad. And notice the iPad got passed to the child component. The child component constructed a string, and that value inside the child component got dynamically bound to the template of the child component. And so we render that value here. And right after we set the child component attribute, to iPad, what we did was emitted an event with a string that said the product iPad with quantity 2 has been ordered. And that was one of our output parameters for the child. So the parent's input parameter caught it and rendered it. Okay, so that was simple enough. Let's go to our next example. So the next one we're going to talk about is the Mediator. And let's start it up so we don't have to wait around for that. I'm going to close this project. And here's our Mediator. So once again, same situation. I used Angular CLI to define a communication mediator project. We have an index.html with an approot tag. We have a main.ts driver program which isn't formatted. We bootstrap our app module. Our app module is located in our app directory. We now look at our app module, and here we're declaring 3 custom components. And we're bootstrapping app component, which is our root component. Okay, so we have an app component, we have an interface, we have an order component, and we have a price quoter. So first let's look at our app component. It uses a stock interface and it uses a component. The selector is app root. We've got the template and the style sheet externalized, and the app component has a stock attribute and it has a price quote handler function which takes an event and defines the stock. So let's look at the template. The template has a price quote child and an order process child. So this is architecturally, the parent has 2 children and one child is going to communicate with the other child by using the parent component as its mediator or as the mediator. So it looks like price quoter takes an event by and invokes price quote handler. Price quote handler is in the parent. Stock is also in the parent. When the stock value in the app component changes, it gets mapped to the stock attribute of the order processor. So let's take a look to see. I'm going to look at the price quoter first. Okay, price quoter has a selector tag, a template, and a style sheet. it has an event emitter with a generic type. It's stock. So by is an event emitter that emits a stock event. There's a stock symbol there, which is a string IBM. There's the last price, which is a number. Let's take a look at the stock interface. It's a stock symbol and a bid price. So when it's constructed, when the component's constructed, we set an interval using the FAT operator. We define the last price to be a random number, and that gets invoked 2 seconds. In 2 seconds. So and then we also have a buy stocks function, which defines a stock to buy as a stock object. It has a stock symbol and a price, and then we emit from the buy. So buy is an event emitter, and when we want to, we emit what we want to emit, which in this case is a stock to buy object of type stock. Okay, so let's go back to the template and the root component. Okay, so you have a price quote handler. You have a price quote handler, which captures, which takes the event buy, which is emitted by this component. You have a stock which maps to this stock in the order component. Okay, let's go back again. Okay, let's look at its template. This has an input button where you click, the value is buy, and when you click, it buys stock. Buy stock gets invoked, and it shows the stock symbol and bid price. It creates this object and emits this event, which we know gets captured up at the price quoter, and the app component gets its stock value, and that value comes up here, comes into the order process component. That gets mapped using this annotation here. So the order component by default shows this message waiting for orders. It has a private stock attribute, and when it receives this stock value, it defines this mesh as placed order to buy 200 shares of a stock. So let's look at its template. It just shows the message. So let's see what's happening here. Okay, let's go back and look at the styles, because it's important we understand what's happening here. This guy, the root component is Dodger Blue. The order component appears to be well, let's see what the template looks like. It's a div tag. It should be pink. Yeah, it's pink. And the price quarter is lawn green. Okay, so we got the web page style sheet, which is this turquoise here. We got our root app component, which is this Dodger blue. And then we have our orders component, which looks like a pink, and the price quoter, which is lawn green or whatever color it was. And whatever price we choose, we can click here, and this component communicated with the app component, which then communicated with the order component. Now notice the page isn't getting rendered. There's certain markup fragments, pieces of the markup fragments that are getting rendered. So it's very important to realize that Angular 4 is doing a magnificent job in asynchronous DOM manipulation and dynamic binding of values in these backing objects, which we call components. And so it's this real dynamic, reactive look and feel that Angular has so much to offer. We used to do stuff like this using portlet technology. In the middle tier, we started using a lot of Ajax, but we've come a long way. This is all on the client, and now we're looking at components communicating like we used to look at portlets, rendering portlets, etc. So things have come a long way, and on top of that, although we have transpiling and compiling going on in the browser, there's a lot we don't have to worry about. Or let's say, hopefully in the future with Angular, we won't have to worry about a lot of different things. Okay, so now let's look at another example. Let me just go back one more time and just take a look at something. Okay, yeah, let's close this. Let's get out of this project. We're going to go into the ng content directory, communication ng content directory. We're going to start that application. We're going to move forward with looking at that example. Okay, this is simple but very fascinating. And I don't really have an opinion of this, but let's take a look at this because it's rather odd, but it is very interesting. I just hope I could apply it to something useful someday. Okay, so let's take a look at the Angular CLI JSON file. Once again, index main.ts. We have an index.html which uses the app root component tag. We have a main.ts, which obviously is not formatted, so we'll format it. And that bootstraps an app module. App module is located here. And here's our app module. We have an app component and a child component. In our declarations, and we bootstrap our app component. So we know which component's our root component. It's this one here. Okay, we're importing a component and a view encapsulation. And we use the component annotation, and we also use our view encapsulation in our annotation. So we have a select app-root. We have our external template and our style sheet. And here we have view encapsulation emulated, which I'll come back to and discuss in a moment. Now let's look at our template. Our template is it's just an HTML markup fragment, but in it, it has a child tag with div parent projects this div onto the child. So basically what this component template's doing is saying, I have a piece of a child, I'm going to project it onto the child. Let's just quickly go look at the child component template. There's an ng content tag here, and that is where the markup fragment will get projected. Okay, the child component doesn't have anything that interesting going on there. There's the child selector, and there's a component here. I mean a template here and a style sheet. So let's look at that template real quick. We already did. So let me just point out a couple of other things here. First of all, the child component has a light green background. The parent component has a light pink background. The application itself has a turquoise body, but it also has a div tag of red and an H2 of plum. Let's see what the app component has. It has an H2 of light pink, and the child has an H2 of light green. So let's take a look at what our application looks like. So the turquoise is our web page. Our application root component is this whole space here. The parent projected a markup fragment in the child. So notice the parent. This div is defined in the parent's template. This div is defined in the child's template. Parent projected this div onto the child. Well, that's strange. It seems like the projected fragment is taking on the style of the parent component. Now, loosely speaking, I don't want to get into detail here too much, but you've got a main style sheet. This stuff appears in the header tag on the top of the web page. So it's defining a div and an H2, etc. The app component itself is emulating a view encapsulation, which means that a special tag is being created in the DOM to encapsulate the styles of the root component. Meaning the web page styles don't affect the root app component styles. The child component is saying the same thing. It's emulating view encapsulation, so the child is going to have its own styles as well. So I guess I was a little surprised to see this, because so it's hard to understand what happened with the styles. But if you look in the debugger, you'll see that as you change the view encapsulations, the styles can all be popped up to the header. If there's no view encapsulation, they could be brought down into the parent and the child. The styles could be in each individual component. If you do maybe native or emulated encapsulation, if you do native encapsulation, then it depends on what the browser is supporting natively with the shadow DOM. But what's happening here is that the shadow DOM is being used and or emulated, and the bottom line is the style definitions are in a certain place in the page where this rendering is happening. Okay, so you can play with the debugger and find out what's going on there if you want. But let's just do some other simple test here. I'm going to say, let's turn this into none. And let's turn this into none. Now, you got to be careful. Let's see what happened, if anything happened here. Nothing's going to happen. Let me see. I'm going to shut this down and restart it. I think Webpack or caching, something happens here where it doesn't render properly. So I'm going to restart it and see if anything changes. Now they're both green. Okay, so let's try to figure out why. Okay, so which one was green? This one was light pink. Then this one was light green. And this one was red. Okay, so I'm going to tell you why I think what's happening here is happening here. What happened is we have 3 div tag colors, one in the web page, one in the parent, and one in the child, and they all got shot up to the header of the web page, and they're in a certain order that the child's taken precedence. So the div tag color of the child was probably the last one listed, or the what happened is the code that was generated is only listing the child's div color. But I've seen it several different ways, so I'm not going to get too much involved in it. Let's just try one more thing. Let's try native. Interesting. So this, okay. So let's see, and notice the change took effect. Let me just be sure about that. Let's just make sure that things happen correctly by restarting this. But let's go back and take a look. This div was pink. This div was light green. And this div was red. And I think the way I last left it was native, right? So this is what Google is doing by default. It's doing what you would expect. This component has its own style. This component has its own style. The web page itself has its own div tag color, but we're not using a div tag in the web page yet. So let's I'm not going to make a mess of this, but let me just see what happens here. What color is this? Very interesting. Very interesting. So notice, I think you got to be careful with some of this stuff. And like I said, I would always restart this to see what happens here. let me just see what I did. The app. Okay, so this should have been. Okay, I think I see what happened here. I'm just going to very quickly. I don't want to bore you with any of this, but let's just see what happened here. I guess I was troubled by what I saw, but you got to be careful of these things. Since the web page didn't understand the heights and the styles of the child components, it seemed to have rendered a color red that sort of interfered with my components, and so that's why you got to be careful with this. But just yeah. So that was an issue. It seemed like when this rendered, the styles and the heights that I defined in my components didn't quite tell the parent web page what was going on, and so there was some confusion there. Okay, so anyway, let's look at the next. Let's look at the next example. Okay, and this is going to be really quick. So in this example, what we do very quickly is we define two markup fragments that we're going to project onto the child. We use the class attribute to define which ng content tag to project onto. So let's see what we did. Child got the header from the parent, today's date. Footer, child got the footer from the parent. And then the child basically had two ng content tags. And we defined a select attribute of the ng content so we can determine which markup fragment to project into the child. Okay, once again, I don't think anything really is new in here at all. But what we did was we have a parent, we have a div, it's defined in the parents template, and then we have the child tag. This child tag is defining the different fragments that are going to be projected onto the child. So it tells the parent component template, you're going to project these onto the child. And so you can do a variety of things here. But what we do in this example is we're showing you how to take one div tag and project it to the child, but we label it header. We take another div tag and project it onto the child, we label it footer, and then the child component basically has an ng content and defines the different attributes, select attributes of where the content is going. Now remember, we looked at the life cycle of components, and there were these life cycle methods, which, when's the component created, when's it initialized, when is the template generated, when is the content projected. So there were some life cycle events there that determine when the content is projected onto the child. So let's take a look to see what happened here. Okay, so here we have the parent. Okay, here it is. Okay, we have the parent tag, the parent component, which takes up all this real estate. And we have the web page with the turquoise background. The parent has a child component which has all of this real estate. And we took the two pink markup fragments from the parent and projected them onto the child. Child got this header from the parent. Child got this footer from the parent. And the child itself had some content of its own, had an NG content tag here, an NG content tag here. This one it labeled header, this one it labeled footer. Once again, we can do a little bit of experimenting here. To see if anything changes. I'm just going to put this back. Okay, and that's all we really wanted to discuss today. I just wanted to show you different ways to communicate. You'll find that you could spend a lot of time inspecting elements and seeing what's going on here. Yeah, so notice we since we're emulating these different attributes of the elements get created, and so if you look at ng host -c1 and ng content -c1, you'll see there's styles associated with each one of these because the styles are now namespaced corresponding to these namespacing. So if you want to take a look at that and delve into it, and if you really want to understand it, the bottom line is you'll be coding applications for production. You're going to be spending a lot of time debugging this stuff and taking a look at why things behave a certain way. So, but it's good to learn. Okay, so let's go back. Okay, let's just end this now, and stay tuned for more tutorials.